Welcome to the Copenhagen History Project. My name is Patrick, and the project is meant to show the fantastic history of the city of Copenhagen. This video is going to be part of a series on the defense works of Copenhagen, and the reason for that is that the defense works of Copenhagen played and still plays a really important part of the lives of Copenhagen citizens. Obviously back in the day, because Copenhagen was the center of violent conflicts. Now more because a lot of these defense works have been preserved, and so some parts of the moats, for example, are lakes in parks that we have now, but other parts of the old defense works are still completely preserved almost, and some of it looks almost like it did back in its heyday 300 or 400 years ago. So this video is going to be about Kastellet. Kastellet is the citadel in the northwestern part of the old Copenhagen. And I want to make this video both to tell a little bit about the history, but also show why this is still a place where you can see the history. Kastellet is one of the favorite places of mine in terms of the atmosphere that it gives. And you can very much access it. It's publicly available for access, and it's a really very calming place to walk, because you can walk on the old ramparts, and they have a great view. So this is essentially a park with a view. As with so many other of these videos, this story is going to start with Christian IV. In 1627, Christian IV wanted to expand the city, and he did so with the Sankt Anne city, as I mentioned in the video about the marble church. And one of the very important parts of the expansion was also the ability to defend Copenhagen, because there was a need to, first of all, expand the defensive area of the harbor. So he wanted the citadel, back then called the Sankt Anne Bastion after the city, to protect the inlet of the harbor. But the other mission was also to move the defense works up towards the lakes of Copenhagen, which are still existent. Now they are changed a lot, but back in the day they still served as a natural defensive barrier. And so Christian IV wanted to have this defense works, this bastion, Sankt Anne Bastion, built in 1627. That's when they started it. And this time is perhaps the most violent time in Danish history. Denmark was bombarded again in 1700 and also 1807, but the Swedish wars from this time around up until the storm of the Swedish, the storm on Copenhagen in 1659, is essentially a time in history where you could say, in hindsight, it was a really good investment to expand and improve the fortifications of Copenhagen. This was a time that was exemplified by basically every time there was peace, it was just to get a break to rebuild for the next war, and sort of like a break in a boxing match. You would just remobilize and gather your strength again for another round. And that is essentially also how the establishment looked at this time period. And I think it's astonishing just how much power the king had at the time to take resources from the country. Obviously, that's why he wanted to invest in the country having resources, with Børsen and Christianshavn and other investments in the city of Copenhagen that would later yield resources that he could then take and use for war waging. But essentially, the resources that was needed to build the citadel is perhaps the most ambitious construction project in Denmark at the time. And I think when you're looking into the actual resources needed and what the king had to do to get the resources and fund and get the citadel built, it's obvious that this was a massive project. And so in order to finance the very resource requiring citadel, the king commissions a tax for 3 years of silk and salt, and he quite openly states in the publishment of this tax that this is in order to finance the very, very expensive citadel that he's going to build now. And now, while the tax was initially going to run only for 3 years, he had to extend it to another 3 years, and then after those 3 years, they actually had to look into commissioning it for 9 years further, but his council only wanted to do that for 6 years because this was quite extensive tax at the time. Salt obviously was an important commodity. So in order to finance it further, they had to commission a tax on ships in the harbor that would be in the harbor for the winter. So ships that were seeking shelter in winter would pay taxes of it in order to finance the building of the citadel. And part of the reason for the citadel being so massively expensive was that half of the current citadel lies beyond the coastline at the time, and the rest of it lies on wetland beaches. And as with the rest of Copenhagen, Copenhagen is built on wetlands, sandbanks, or directly in the water by land reclamation, right? So in order to get the construction going, they had to build a foundation of large rocks and stones that were carried as far away as from Sweden by peasants that were commissioned or required to bring stones and rocks to the building place. And in order to fill out this wetlands, you needed to bring a lot of earth and dirt. And so everyone in Copenhagen, all the aristocracy and the citizenships, the citizens that had wagons and horses were required to bring 20 loads of earth or dirt out into the building grounds to construct this, to construct the defensive works of the citadel. And as you can see on the pictures of it, the walls of the citadel are really quite tall compared to the topography of anywhere nearby, obviously because it's a beach. Now, regardless of the massive investment that the citadel was, it would really quickly turn out to be a good investment, because only in 1659 the Swedes would show up at the doorstep of Copenhagen to storm the city. And while the necessity of war had prompted the building of several bastions even further out than the citadel, these were not manned, and therefore they were given up to the Swedes. And as such, the citadel again became really significantly important for the defense of Copenhagen. And therefore, the citadel now goes into the second stage of construction, which is obviously rushed, but also because it was done during the siege of Copenhagen at the time. And just to give an example of how quickly and how rushed this job was done, the women of Copenhagen would essentially gather all the filth and all the dirt and earth they could find in the city, also from the gutter, and bring it to Kastellet in order to even improve the ramparts and make them even taller. And I think obviously the storm of Copenhagen by the Swedes in 1659 deserves a video and a longer video on its own. But essentially the Danes managed to push back the Swedes, and the Swedes gave up storming Copenhagen. And this is essentially where the citadel that we know now was built immediately after in 1662. The guy, Hendrik Ruyse, a Dutch guy from the Netherlands, was commissioned to build the citadel as we see it now. The citadel now is shrunk a little bit compared to the one that he built. There were several more bastions in a first and second line defense. Now the current citadel would be the third and fourth line defense. But Hendrik Ruyse essentially was hired as a siege expert, and if you have been to the Netherlands and also Belgium, some of the cities they have there also, in a similar way to Kastellet and to Copenhagen, bear historical resemblance to the defense that we have here. So obviously there was expertise in the area from the Netherlands, and that was brought to Copenhagen to construct this new citadel. And that was very much something that happened in the Dutch Renaissance. That was very much something that happened throughout Copenhagen in general. Christianshavn and other building projects were constructed by inspiration of the Netherlands or by Dutch people. And this was a little bit of a short story and background of the construction of the citadel, but obviously still, since the citadel is still existing, I thought I'd just show how it looks like currently with historical glasses. I think the first thing anyone would see when they try to enter the citadel is the initial gate, and then a very nice wooden bridge that leads over the moat. But very, very quickly, what you will see is these earthen ramparts that are either newly cut from grass or with some quite long grass on it. And I think the reason I mentioned the grass is that we have sometimes discussed that now we have the lawnmowers that cut this grass, and that makes the ramparts look very, very impressive. However, maybe if you consider the Danish weather, a very, very steep rampart that is full of long, wet grass could potentially be a very, very nasty foe in itself, just because the grass might be so slippery that getting up over these walls after, I mean, the moat must be like 20 meters wide. Just getting up there must be, without any sort of war equipment, must be a real hassle in itself without getting shot at. But of course, if you were storming this in 1659, then someone would be shooting at you, and might be shooting at with you with quite a lot of guns, one might add. So this is what you are met with. Next, what you are met with is a second moat, and then the gatehouse. And the gatehouse is interesting from the outside. It's a flat brick building that used to hold a couple of guns. But from the inside, this is also where you still see that this is an official place, where you still have the military, the guards, the Queen's Guards still stand here and keep a watch. This is called the main gate. This is also the King's Gate, the front entrance. Now, I didn't want to shoot videos or photos of the Queen's Guard, but I did take a photo of the Norway Gate, which is almost identical but opposing in the other end of the citadel to the King's Gate. The Norway Gate is famous because this is where the Germans entered on the morning of the 9th of April 1940. And they did that by blowing up the gate so that the soldiers inside the barracks actually thought it was a boiler or a kettle that blew up in the barracks itself. As you see, the citadel is, it used to be barracks, now these buildings are administration buildings, and these were the first barracks in Denmark. They used to house thousands of soldiers and their families. You see here on this photo the parade grounds, and on this photo you see the main street up through the barracks, or now administration buildings. Another thing that is in the citadel, and this is where I'm saying the citadel is playing still a very important ceremonial and central role for the military of Denmark. This is the monument of peacekeeping soldiers that fell. And not too many days ago, I think there was a 31st of May, there was the ceremony for these peacekeeping soldiers. And I snuck a photo of this obviously very important ceremony with the Crown Prince attending and all the veterans. So this is very much still a place that is enormously important for the official Denmark. The citadel is one of the best preserved citadels from its time in Northern Europe. However, it used to be quite a lot bigger, in the sense that the citadel in itself is a third or fourth line defense, and the first and second line defenses are definitely not existing. But the topography of the neighborhood still bears remarks of these old bastions, and you can see somewhere that there are bridges that lead essentially from one bastion to another. And there's 100% chance that tourists and modern Copenhagen people don't realize that they're walking on a bridge currently, because they're going from one bastion to another. But obviously, while these are tiny hills in that they are 5 or 10 meters, this is old beach, so it's not natural. So people that are traveling on a bridge to another are essentially doing so because they are traveling from one bastion to another. Another thing I try to visualize here, and as I said in a previous video, it's very difficult for me to visualize this in photos and videos, is the steepness of the ramparts. These are really quite tall and very, very steep as well. There is a initial rampart that lies just beyond the big one that I'm standing on when I show this picture here, and I don't exactly know what this is for, but it's quite obvious that this is just a little bit taller than a grown person. And I think for me, what this creates is a sort of safe place for people to get very, very close to the moat and be able to do whatever they need to do, clear out something or get just really close to the enemy without the enemy being able to shoot at them. So it sort of creates a trench just beyond the moat. And I think, I'm guessing this is the idea with this thing, but I think it's very, very interesting. Now, obviously, the ramparts themselves are, I cannot imagine someone having to climb this without a ladder or something like a auxiliary tool. It just does not seem, I don't know how you would do that, especially if you're heavy with gear. I cannot see, and that is obviously the point, I cannot see how that is possible. So the defensive nature of these old star forts, as you'd call them, is obviously that you can shoot in any given direction. So there's not a flat piece of this where the defender would have to stick their head out to shoot down this rampart. You would have the bastions in the end. There are 5 of them, and these would have a very clear sight of all the way along the rampart, and be able to shoot down not just their own rampart, but also be able to shoot out on these initial bastions that are islands from in the middle of the bridge. Essentially, you have this island that a redoubt that is an island between the Gatehouse, which has a bridge out to the redoubt, and then there's a further bridge out to the preliminary gate. This concludes our contemporary tour of the historical citadel, and I think this is showing very much why the defense that used to be around Copenhagen is still very relevant today, and why it's really quite interesting to look into. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Thank you.